What happens when the world's most powerful navy decides it's had enough? In the dark waters of the Gulf of Oman, American warships just delivered a message that Tehran never saw coming, and what happened next has completely changed the balance of power in the Middle East. If you want to stay ahead of the global events that actually matter, smash that like button right now, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with someone who needs to understand what's really happening in the world today. Trust me, you'll want to hear every second of this. The date is etched into naval history now. Early morning, Gulf of Oman, coordinates classified but close enough to Iranian waters to make Tehran very nervous. 4 American warships cut through the dark sea in formation, their positions carefully calculated, their mission locked in weeks before anyone in Iran suspected what was about to unfold. These aren't just any ships. These are amphibious assault vessels, each one carrying enough firepower to level a small city. But what makes this moment different, what makes this strike unlike anything we've seen before, is not just the ships themselves. It's what they're carrying on their decks. Rows of launch pods, each one aimed with surgical precision at targets deep inside Iranian territory. This isn't a warning shot. This isn't a demonstration. This is the United States Navy systematically dismantling Iran's ability to project power across the Gulf. And they're doing it in a way that Iran simply cannot counter. Let's rewind for a moment and understand how we got here. For months, tensions between Washington and Tehran have been escalating. Iranian fast attack boats harassing commercial shipping. Drones launched from Iranian soil, striking at U.S. allies. Missiles fired into the Gulf, some landing dangerously close to American vessels. Tehran has been playing a dangerous game, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses, convinced that geography gives them an advantage. After all, the Gulf is their backyard. They know every inlet, every current, every radar shadow. They've built an entire military doctrine around asymmetric warfare, using speedboats, missiles, and drones to threaten much larger forces. For years, this strategy worked. It kept the Americans cautious. It made every decision a calculation of risk versus reward. But something shifted. Washington decided that caution had run its course. The Pentagon drew a line, and Iran crossed it one too many times. The American response didn't come with a press conference or a televised address. It came in the form of fire and precision, delivered from the decks of warships operating in international waters. At exactly 05:23 local time, the first missile pod erupted. A column of white-hot flame tore upward into the pre-dawn darkness. The solid-fuel rocket engine ignited with a force that shook the entire deck. Within 2 seconds, another pod fired. Then another, then another. A cascade of launches, each one timed to the second, each one following a flight path calculated by some of the most advanced targeting computers on the planet. In less than a minute, more than a dozen missiles were airborne, climbing rapidly, arcing toward the Iranian coastline. Crews on nearby merchant ships saw the flashes. Some pulled out their phones and started recording. Within minutes, videos were spreading across social media, bright streaks climbing into the sky. The unmistakable signature of a precision strike in progress. No one needed confirmation from the Pentagon to know what was happening. The world was watching in real time. But here's what makes this strike so devastating, so impossible for Iran to counter. These aren't the old missiles that follow a predictable arc. These are precision strike missiles, the newest weapons in the U.S. arsenal. They don't just fly high and drop. They maneuver. They adjust. They actively steer themselves all the way to impact. Iran's air defense network was built to handle traditional ballistic threats, missiles that follow a textbook parabola, easy to track, easy to predict. These new American missiles break all those rules. They fly lower, they change course mid-flight, and most importantly, they arrive all at once. This is called time-on-target tactics. You launch missiles seconds apart, but you program each one to arrive at the exact same moment. Imagine 13 separate packages sent from different locations, all scheduled to land on the same doorstep in the same 10-second window. That's what Iran's air defenses had to deal with, and they simply couldn't handle it. Let's talk about what was happening on the Iranian side while those missiles were in the air. The moment the first launch was detected, alarms started going off across Iran's southern military command. Radar operators saw the thermal signatures immediately. Every screen lit up with tracks climbing out of the Gulf. But seeing a threat and stopping it are two completely different things. Iran's air defense system is layered and sophisticated. They have long-range radars that can see hundreds of kilometers away. They have missile batteries positioned along the coast. They have trained crews who know their equipment inside and out. But all of that means nothing if the system can't react fast enough. And that's exactly where the problem lies. Iran's command structure requires authorization at multiple levels before a single interceptor can be fired. A radar operator detects the threat and reports it up the chain. The report goes to Sector Command. Sector Command sends it to National Headquarters in Tehran. Tehran analyzes the data, confirms the threat, and sends authorization back down the chain. By the time that authorization reaches the frontline battery commander, Precious minutes have already been lost. Meanwhile, the American missiles are screaming toward their targets at 3 times the speed of sound. One Iranian air defense battery did manage to get into the fight, a Tor M2 system positioned directly along the approach route. This is a capable system, mobile, radar-guided, designed specifically to shoot down fast-moving targets. The crew is ready, the interceptors were loaded, the radar was locked on, but the numbers were against them from the start. The American missiles were flying too high for most of the engagement window. The Tor system can reach up to about 30 kilometers in altitude, but the incoming warheads were transiting above that ceiling for most of their flight. Only in the final seconds, as they dove toward their targets, did they drop low enough to be engaged. The battery commander knew the math. He had 4 launchers. He could guide maybe 8 interceptors at once. He was facing 13 maneuvering targets arriving almost simultaneously. Even if every shot was perfect, it wasn't enough. But he fired anyway, because that's what professionals do. They execute their mission even when the odds are impossible. 2 interceptors leapt off the rails, white contrails streaking upward. The proximity fuses detonated exactly where the targeting computer predicted the warheads would be. The problem was, by the time the interceptors arrived, the warheads had already moved. They had maneuvered just enough to slip past the kill radius. The interceptors exploded in empty air. The tracks kept coming. 2 more interceptors fired. Same result. By the time the battery had expended 4 missiles, the engagement window was closed. There was no time for another salvo. The commander could only watch as the remaining warheads plunged toward their targets, unstoppable. Now here's where this gets even more interesting. The targets weren't just random military sites. The first wave hit the Bampur military complex deep inside Iranian territory, more than 400 kilometers from the coast. This is a base that houses mechanized infantry brigades, the kind of units that have been launching attacks into the Gulf for months. The warheads didn't just hit the base, they hit specific buildings, barracks, command centers, vehicle depots. Each missile carried a warhead designed to penetrate structures before detonating inside. Maximum damage. Minimum warning. The troops stationed there had no idea what was coming until the first explosion tore through the northern barracks. Within 10 seconds, the entire compound was engulfed. But that wasn't the only target. A second wave of missiles, launched from a different ship, hit a rail junction west of the base. This wasn't just about destroying equipment. This was about cutting off Iran's ability to resupply and reinforce. That rail line is the only heavy-duty logistics route into that entire region. Without it, moving armor and heavy weapons becomes a logistical nightmare. Roads in that area are narrow, winding mountain passes, not suitable for tanks or large convoys. By taking out the rail junction, the U.S. didn't just hit a target. They isolated an entire military region. This is strategic thinking on a level that most people don't fully appreciate. Let me pause here for just a second, because if you're finding this breakdown valuable, I need you to do something. Drop a like on this video, hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, drop a comment below telling me what you think Iran's next move should be. Seriously, I read every single comment, and I want to hear your perspective. Are we heading toward a larger conflict, or will Tehran back down? Let me know. So what happened next? How did Tehran react? Because this is where the story gets even more intense. Within hours of the strikes, Iranian state media went into overdrive. The initial reports were predictable. They downplayed the damage. They claimed air defenses had shot down several missiles. They said casualties were minimal. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual bluster and threats of retaliation, a different tone emerged from Tehran. Iranian military officials held a press conference. They didn't deny that the strikes had occurred. They didn't pretend it was business as usual. Instead, they acknowledged that American forces had conducted a precision strike on military installations. They called it an act of aggression. They warned of consequences. But the language was measured, almost careful. And that's what shocked analysts around the world. Because if you know anything about Iranian rhetoric, you know that measured and careful are not the usual responses. Typically, Tehran responds to any perceived provocation with bold declarations, with promises of crushing retaliation, with speeches about American weakness and Iranian strength. This time was different. This time, the response felt almost restrained. Why the change? Because Tehran understands something that most casual observers might miss. This strike wasn't just about destroying a few buildings or killing some troops. It was a demonstration of capability. It was the United States showing Iran, and more importantly, showing the world, that it can hit targets deep inside Iranian territory with precision and speed that current defenses simply cannot stop. The missiles were launched from ships that were already moving away before the first warhead even landed. The targeting was so accurate that specific rooms inside specific buildings were hit. And perhaps, most importantly, this was done with a fraction of the available firepower. Each of those American ships can carry dozens of these missiles. What happened at Bampur was not a full-scale assault. It was a single surgical strike using a small percentage of available munitions. Tehran got the message loud and clear. If the United States wanted to escalate, it could launch 10 times as many missiles, hit 10 times as many targets, and there would be nothing Iran could do to stop it. That's a terrifying realization for any military command. But let's dig deeper into what this means strategically. For years, Iran has built its entire defensive doctrine around the idea that the Gulf is a contested space. They believed that their geography, their asymmetric tactics, and their willingness to take risks gave them an advantage. They thought that the United States would be cautious, that the cost of striking deep into Iran would be too high, that the risk of retaliation would keep Washington's hand steady. This strike shattered all of those assumptions. The Americans didn't use aircraft that could be shot down. They didn't send troops that could be captured. They used ship-launched missiles that Iran's defenses couldn't reach, and they did it in a way that demonstrated complete operational freedom. Those ships operated in international waters. They fired, they maneuvered, and they left before Iran could even organize a response. There was no dramatic dogfight, no tense standoff, just cold, calculated precision, executed flawlessly. Now, some people might ask, why didn't Iran respond immediately? Why didn't they launch their own missiles at American ships or strike at U.S. bases in the region? The answer comes down to capability and consequences. Iran's anti-ship missiles are formidable in theory, but in practice, they face the same problem their air defenses faced. American ships don't sit still. They maneuver constantly. They have their own defensive systems that can intercept incoming missiles. And most importantly, the moment Iran launches a missile at a U.S. warship, the rules of engagement change completely. Right now, the strikes are limited to military targets inside Iran. But if Iran directly attacks American naval assets, the response would be overwhelming. Tehran knows this. Their military planners aren't reckless. They understand that escalation would bring devastation. So instead of responding with force, they responded with words. Strong words, yes, but words nonetheless. They called for international condemnation. They appealed to the United Nations. They framed themselves as victims of American aggression. But they didn't fire back. And that tells you everything you need to know about the true balance of power. Here's another angle most people aren't talking about. This strike also sends a message to other nations watching closely. Russia has been observing how Western precision weapons perform in real combat conditions. China is taking notes on how the United States projects power in contested regions. Both nations are undoubtedly analyzing the tactics used, the technology deployed, and the results achieved. If American missiles can penetrate Iranian defenses this easily, what does that say about the effectiveness of similar systems elsewhere? Russia exports air defense technology to dozens of countries. China is building its own versions of these systems. If they can't stop U.S. precision strikes, the entire market for these weapons comes into question. This isn't just about Iran. This is about the global perception of American military dominance. And right now, that perception is being strongly reinforced. Let me give you another layer to think about. The economic implications. Iran's military infrastructure isn't cheap. Training crews, maintaining equipment, building bases deep inside the country, all of this costs enormous amounts of money. And Iran's economy is already under severe strain from sanctions. Every time the U.S. destroys a major installation, Iran faces a choice. Do they rebuild it, knowing it can be hit again? Do they invest in better defenses, even though those defenses have already proven inadequate? Or do they shift resources away from military confrontation and toward economic survival? These are the questions being debated in Tehran right now, and none of the answers are good. Rebuilding invites another strike. Better defenses cost money they don't have. And backing down politically is almost impossible, given the rhetoric they've used for years. Iran is trapped in a strategic dilemma with no easy exit. But there's also a human element here that we can't ignore. The troops stationed at Bampur didn't choose to be the target of American missiles. They were following orders, serving their country, doing what their commanders told them to do. Many of them likely had no idea they were even at risk. They went to sleep thinking they were safe, deep inside Iran, far from any front line. And then in 10 seconds, their world exploded. War is often discussed in terms of strategy and technology and geopolitics, but at the end of the day, it's people who pay the price. Young men who will never go home, families who will receive devastating news, communities that will mourn losses. This is the grim reality behind every military strike, no matter how precise, no matter how justified the commanders believe it to be. And it's worth pausing to acknowledge that reality, even as we analyze the strategic implications. Here's something else you need to understand, because this is absolutely crucial. Hit that like button if you're still with me, and make sure you're subscribed, because this channel is the only place you'll get this level of analysis without the mainstream media filter. And please, share this video. People need to know what's really happening. Your single share could inform dozens of people who are still in the dark. Looking forward, the question everyone is asking is simple. What happens next? Does this lead to a wider war, or does it mark the beginning of de-escalation? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. But we can make some educated guesses based on how both sides have behaved so far. The United States has demonstrated that it can strike Iranian military targets with impunity. That capability is not going away. In fact, it's likely to expand as more of these advanced missiles are produced and deployed. Iran now has to operate under the assumption that any significant military installation within 400 kilometers of the coast is vulnerable. That's a huge constraint. It limits where they can station troops, where they can store equipment, and how they can organize their defenses. Essentially, the entire southern half of Iran is now under the shadow of American precision strike capability. That changes everything about how Iran can operate militarily. On the other hand, Iran has options that don't involve direct military confrontation. They can increase support for proxy groups throughout the region. They can use cyber attacks to target American infrastructure. They can apply diplomatic pressure through international channels. They can try to fracture the coalition of nations that support U.S. actions. These are all tools that Iran has used before, and they'll likely use them again. The difference now is that the military option, the threat of direct confrontation, has become much less credible. Tehran can bluster all they want, but after what just happened, everyone knows that a shooting war with the United States would be catastrophically one-sided. That doesn't mean Iran will stop being a problem. It just means they'll have to be more careful about how they cause problems. There's also the domestic political situation inside Iran to consider. The Iranian government is not a monolith. There are hardliners who want confrontation at any cost. There are pragmatists who understand that the current path is unsustainable. There are military leaders who just watch their defenses fail in real time and are now questioning whether their equipment and doctrine are adequate. These internal tensions matter. They shape how Tehran responds. If the pragmatists gain influence, we might see a shift toward negotiation, toward finding an off-ramp from the current crisis. If the hardliners prevail, we might see escalation through proxies, more attacks on shipping, more drone strikes, more attempts to destabilize the region. The next few weeks will reveal which faction has the upper hand. From the American perspective, this strike accomplished several objectives simultaneously. It degraded Iranian military capability. It demonstrated technological superiority. It sent a deterrent message to Tehran and to other potential adversaries. And it did all of this without losing a single American service member, without putting aircraft at risk, and without creating the kind of dramatic footage that could turn public opinion against the operation. In the age of social media and instant global communication, that last point is more important than people realize. There are no videos of American pilots being shot down, no images of burning wreckage with U.S. insignia, no hostages, no dramatic rescues, just missiles launching from ships and impacts on targets hundreds of kilometers away. Clinically effective, strategically sound, politically manageable. But we should also acknowledge the risks. Every military action carries the possibility of unintended consequences. What if one of those missiles had malfunctioned and hit a civilian area? What if Iranian air defenses had gotten lucky and shot one down, giving Tehran a propaganda victory? What if the strike had killed a high-ranking official, forcing Iran to respond more aggressively than they otherwise would have? These are the variables that keep military planners awake at night. In this case, everything went according to plan. But the margin for error in these operations is razor thin. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the entire situation could spiral out of control. Let's also talk about the technology itself for a moment, because this is genuinely fascinating. The precision strike missile represents a generational leap in capability. Older systems could hit targets accurately, but they were expensive, complex, and required extensive support infrastructure. These new missiles are relatively compact, can be launched from ships or ground platforms, and are sophisticated enough to handle the entire engagement from launch to impact with minimal human intervention. The guidance system uses a combination of inertial navigation and GPS updates constantly correcting its flight path. The warhead is designed to penetrate before exploding, maximizing damage to hardened structures. And the quasi-ballistic trajectory makes interception extremely difficult with current air defense technology. This isn't science fiction. This is operational hardware deployed and proven effective. And it's changing the calculus of modern warfare in ways we're only beginning to understand. Here's the bottom line. What happened in the Gulf of Oman is not just another headline. It's a turning point. The United States demonstrated that it can reach deep into Iranian territory, strike with surgical precision, and face minimal risk in doing so. Iran's response, measured and careful, reveals that Tehran understands the new reality. They cannot win a conventional military confrontation. Their defenses, despite years of investment and development, are inadequate against this level of technology and tactics. The strategic map of the Middle East has shifted. Iran's ability to threaten shipping, to intimidate neighbors, to project power across the Gulf, all of it is now constrained by the knowledge that American precision strikes can reach them anytime, anywhere, with little warning and less opportunity to respond. This doesn't mean the conflict is over. It means the rules have changed. And both sides are now operating under a new set of assumptions about what is possible and what is too dangerous to attempt. For Iran, the path forward is treacherous. They cannot admit weakness without undermining their entire regional posture. But they cannot escalate without inviting destruction. So they're left with a middle ground, managing the situation, trying to save face while avoiding actions that would provoke an even more devastating response. It's a humiliating position for a nation that has built its identity around resistance and defiance. But it's the reality they're facing, and how they navigate this reality in the coming weeks and months will determine whether this crisis gradually de-escalates or erupts into something far more dangerous. What we witnessed was not just a military strike. It was a message from Washington to Tehran, a message from the United States to the world. A message that says the rules of engagement have changed, that technology has shifted the balance, and that the risks of confrontation are no longer symmetrical. Iran tested the boundaries. The United States responded by redrawing them entirely. And now both sides, along with the rest of the world, are adjusting to the new map. The question is not whether this changes everything. The question is how long it takes for everyone to fully understand just how much has changed. Because in the cold mathematics of modern precision warfare, this strike proved something that cannot be unproven. It demonstrated a level of capability that cannot be ignored. And it set a precedent that will shape military and political decisions for years to come. The Gulf of Oman is a relatively small body of water. But what happened there in the darkness of early morning has consequences that will ripple across continents and decades. This is the new reality, and we're all living in it now.